It's now my pleasure to welcome to the stage Rear Admiral Thomas A. Cropper, President of the California Maritime Academy, who is going to be our luncheon speaker. I'll tell you, among the things that I really love about the California Maritime Academy, they do great hires. They really do, and that's the symbol, I think, of a good ship, so to speak. Jerry Asplund, a man known to many of us, was the president of CMA when they became part of CSU, which was, as you can well imagine, a major, major accomplishment for CMA. President Bill Eisenhart, who I believe was there about 10 years, is that close, 10 years? Among the best of the best, who loved the challenge of building and bringing CMA to the 21st century. And then Captain Eisenhart, no. What is he? What is his rank? Captain? Rear Admiral. He decided to head off into the woods, literally, and return to Maine. And once again, CMA had this excellent hire. You know, and what I said during the process actually was, what a tough haul for CSU, because in addition to needing an academician, somebody who could serve as president of Institution of Higher Learning, they also really needed somebody who understood the maritime work and the maritime industry. So I had an opportunity to have lunch with President Cropper. And I know that this will come as a surprise to many of you who don't know me. Those of you who do will have no doubt. I sort of find myself magnetized towards dreamers and visionaries. Well, they did it again. They brought in this man who epitomizes a dreaming visionary who has all sorts of great plans for this jewel in our inventory of assets. Thomas A. Cropper is the 14th president of the California Maritime Academy, one of the 23 campuses in the California State University system. He began his presidency on July 1st, 2012, after a 31-year career in the United States Navy. President Cropper's shore assignments included service as military assistant to Secretary of Defense William Cone and as the Navy Federal Executive Fellow at the Brookings Institution. He also served as U.S. Third Fleet Chief of Staff, headed the Joint Chiefs of Staff Working Group chartered with the development of national-level security strategy, and led and managed 24,000 people in combat operations as Deputy Commander, U.S. Naval Forces, U.S. Central Command. Now, 24,000 people is not, the 975 is not quite as many as 24,000. However, I would imagine the challenge is equally great. It is really a pleasure for me and an honor to be able to introduce the president of the California Maritime Academy, Rear Admiral Thomas A. Cropper.
Well, thank you, Norman. I won't be up here very long because I'll come out and talk. I want to say Winston Churchill, his quote is, "I appreciate the exaggerated way you tell the truth." So for those who know you, Norman, and I do, thank you. I would like to step off the stage and walk around among you. Is that working? How's that? Okay. Check. There we go. Okay. So I wanted to take a moment and follow up. You see how many people are here from Cal Maritime. We're very excited about all things maritime, and you've met our cadets, you've met our faculty and staff. So we want to say we're here to support you, but we also want to thank those of you who are here supporting us. So I want to just say thank you to the sponsors, thank you to people throughout the industry and profession who come here. I know my provost, Jerry Jacobowski, said this is my fourth conference, and by far this is the best. So thank you for kind of stepping it up. This is good. Now I put this slide up here, said history starts now. For a lot of people in the room, you can look at my temples and see that there's something missing in color. We might think that history doesn't start now, but for the young men and women at Cal Maritime, history does start now. Their history is beginning as they step out of Cal Maritime and go into a very dynamic and awesome profession. So, okay, next slide. So welcome. Welcome to the American Pacific Century. So some of you are looking at that. This is not an upside-down map. This is actually from the Australians. It's called MacArthur's Universal Corrective Map of the World. That's the Pacific. And I think it's really interesting. I want you to know that our cadets are getting a different perspective than the world turned the other way. Now, maybe the world hasn't turned upside down, but that's the Pacific. The last century, the 20th century, was an Atlantic century. We fought 2 wars in Europe, across the Atlantic. Okay, that's where our prosperity lay, in Europe. Our prosperity in the 21st century is right there in Asia. We know that. We're teaching that. I think if I could give an assignment, we have to go out and make sure that our public knows and our partners know that we not only is this the Pacific century, but we are in it. We're 13 years into the American Pacific century. So, what are people saying about this Pacific century? I put one quote up here. It's from Foreign Policy in November of 11, so maybe almost 18 months ago, talking about markets in Asia and what that brings to the United States and what it brings to our citizens in terms of jobs and prosperity in the future. Also went to Heritage Foundation. Interesting point here. Asia is the only component of the global economy that, at least in the near future, will grow. We are in the midst of the worst economic era in probably 80 years, 1 or 2, maybe 3 generations. If we're going to grow our economy, we have to think about Asia. It is an Asia, it is a Pacific century. That's where we're going to go. And our students are prepared for that. So I have a quiz. How many state maritime academies do we have in the United States? Anyone want to tell me? 6. You said 6. That's correct. And we have 1 federal academy, which makes 7. So our federal academy is Kings Point. Okay, let me find one of my cadets. Okay, how many maritime academies are there in California?
1.
Okay, good. All right. 1 maritime academy in California, and there's 1 maritime academy on the Pacific. We're the only maritime academy on the Pacific. We service the citizens of Alaska, Washington, Oregon, California, and Hawaii, all maritime states. We are positioned on the Pacific Rim in the Pacific century. This ought to be a great opportunity for Cal Maritime. It ought to be a great opportunity for the profession to help grow and be prosperous as a state and as a nation. Okay, I know some people say California dreaming. I say California steaming. That's what we do. Our GDP in 11, because we haven't totaled up 12 yet, almost $2 trillion. If you can see the countries in red, these are the export markets from California. China, Japan, South Korea. 3 of the 5, okay, in Asia, in the Pacific. Top 10 countries that are importing California products. Okay, 6 of 10. 6 of the top 10 are in Asia. This is in the worst economy we've had. Okay, but this is a transition. It didn't just happen because of that economic downturn. This is a fundamental shift to the Pacific. And I don't want to miss the point here. 8 of 10 cannot be reached by train or truck. 8 of 10 cannot be reached by train or truck. It is intermodal, but you have to operate out on the sea. Okay, what does Asian trade mean? What does Pacific trade mean? It means jobs for Americans. Okay, when we look at imports, again, 3 of the 5 are in Asia. When we look at the top 10 countries, you can see 6 of the 10. Now, we know what we import from Saudi Arabia. Okay, so that's energy. But if you look at 8 of those 10 cannot be reached by train or truck. We rely on the maritime. We are a maritime state. I would ask you, when you draw your maps of California, make sure you draw that 200-mile exclusive economic zone. Add that maritime in. Make sure that that's California, that we don't just draw the land borders. We live on land, but we thrive through the maritime. Our trade moves over the sea. This is AIS tracks, just to show you the density, and the red are the most dense, and you can see what's happening in Southeast Asia. Or maybe you can't because I'm in your way. That's pretty spectacular. 90% of the trade's moving by sea, 95% by value moves by sea. It's also important, we know that 80% of the world's population lives within about 100 miles or less of the coast, and 80% of the world's population depends upon the proteins in the sea for survival. On a globe where 70% is covered by the ocean. It's one big ocean. And back to Dr. Ninchik's point about the web, it's not seas and oceans, it's one big web of ocean. And it means opportunity. This is from the Bureau of Labor. Projected employment change in this decade, the one we're in, a 20% change in water transportation workers. A 20% change. The rest of the economy may be 14%, so we're going to lead in job creation. Okay, and do we need it? Also, I want to talk about other points of learning at Cal Maritime, and also some things that we as a body, as a profession together, we know that we talk a lot about money, which I just did, but it's not always about the money. We have dedicated people in the maritime who make a huge difference across our planet. Maritime is the first responder. Sometimes we don't think about that. We think of our first responders and we think about our police and fire and security, but globally, maritime's the first responder. I'm not sure if anyone knows about the Manhattan boat lift. Show me a show of hands. Okay. 9/11, Manhattan needs to be evacuated. There are 500,000 Americans stuck on Manhattan Island who need to leave the island. 500,000 people are boat lifted off of Manhattan Island in 9 hours by a volunteer effort by mariners. I invite you to go to YouTube, just type in boat lift 9/11 for about a 12-minute clip. It's absolutely fabulous. Come back. This is not money. This is why the logistics side, the shore side, the sea side, the business side, every aspect of the maritime profession has to come together to make things work. Our students understand that. We understand that as an institution. We think you know that. We know that, and it's what is going to power us in prosperity in the next 2 decades. I do want to talk back to the first responding. The first people in Christmas 2004 to Indonesia, mariners. The first people to Katrina, mariners. Pakistani flooding, mariners. All the way up through Haiti and then into 3/11, which was the tsunami in Japan. We had to go in and clear. And the picture you saw before, if we can just go back one. Okay, those are boats that are about 6 miles inland. That's how far the tsunami went inland. 15,000 people died. The international response was overwhelming, but it started with the Maritime. Maritime professionals had to work the logistics. Maritime professionals had to work on the port clearance. Maritime professionals had to assess safety. It was a huge maritime effort, for which the Japanese were also very thankful. And if you also want to go to YouTube, you can find a thank you from the Japanese people. If you just put in Operation Tomodachi, you'll see, or you can put arigato, and you'll find that as well. Okay. But I think that the reason that all comes together is not necessarily education, training, skill. I think it's about values. And that's what we draw from the maritime profession, people in industry, practitioners who can teach skills but also convey values. And there's no way that we as a nation can respond in this way as maritime professionals without the teamwork and trust. We're in different companies, we're in different segments of the industry, but your word is good. And when you say you're going to do something, it's going to happen. If you say you're going to have gear in place at 2 o'clock in the morning at this spot, it's going to happen. Why? Because that's what you learn at a place like Cal Maritime. You're reliable, and the self-discipline that you have is going to make the maritime profession better. Okay. So, let's look at opportunities, because I would ask us to kind of recalibrate what we think about maritime. If you think about Cal Maritime as a merchant marine academy, you may be needing to open up that aperture. So let's start here. We've already talked about this a bit today. Marine highway saves resources. I know it can get a little bit testy, but one barge can move 1,750 short tons of dry cargo, or you can get 70 trucks. Slide. Okay, there's 27,000 barrels of cargo, or 144 semis. Okay, 456 containers on a barge using 75 barrels of oil, or we can use 456 trucks with 645 barrels of oil. Okay, now we're talking about fuel efficiency. We use a lot on ships, but look at what we're moving. This is a green profession. This is a green transportation mode. We need to think about this in that way. It's very powerful when you see these numbers. This is from DOT and MARAD. Slide. Just in case you want to know, there's an airplane, okay, and there's your cargo ship, just to give you a frame of reference on fuel requirements to move the same piece of cargo. It's a very efficient way, a very green way of moving. And if you want to look at greenhouse gas emissions, to move a metric ton, 1 kilometer, it's 1/3 of what you get from trucks and about half of what you get from rail. And that's where we are right now. That's where we are right now. We're the greenest, and we need to get greener, and we can. Okay. So when I say ask you to open the aperture on maritime, I would just ask you to think about some things that we're looking forward. Opening up that aperture, saying what constitutes maritime. If we just think about Merchant Marine Academy, that might not work. 5% maybe of global shipping is under U.S. flag. As long as that pie grows, we're okay, you know, whether that 5% sliver. But marine insurance and underwriting, anybody in that business here? Anybody associated with it? Okay, that's a big deal. We have two huge associations in San Francisco and down in LA in marine underwriting. Okay, the Russians went to the Arctic and planted a flag on the floor. Was that a stunt or a signal? Is that a signal that maybe deep sea exploration is the next Apollo project? Are we back to the 70s? Anybody remember Sea Lab? Okay. How about marine safety and security? You know, John talked about that earlier. The industries, the companies are working hard on safety, but we need to build it into DNA. And the DNA is right at Cal Maritime and the other maritime academies, that we inculcate this idea of safety, these processes and procedures, and the values of safety and security early. Ocean policy. Are we ready for ocean policy? Are we ready for Arctic policy? Do we understand about the safety of mariners up in the Arctic, transiting the Arctic? What does that mean to our ports? Sustainable energy. We have a project right now that we're looking at offshore wind, or an offshore wind and gas combination. When the wind dies down, the gas picks up. Okay, that's maritime. I mean, that's future, and it's very green. Environmental sciences, we're going to use that marine highway. We're going to use the oceans. We have to do it in a sustainable way. We have 80% of the planet depending on that ocean to provide the protein to survive. So we think that's maritime as well. And then transportation management. Maritime can't stand alone. Shipping can't stand alone. It's intermodal. We understand that. What's the next container? What's the next AIS? Who thought of AIS? Who came up with that? But what's the next step? That's what we want to be able to do. Our institution wants to take those kind of questions to try to bring answers to you, to the people in the profession, in the industry. We don't want to work on what I would call highfalutin problems. We'd like to work on the problems that you have, that you anticipate in the next 2 to 3 to 5 years. The problems that you're facing now. Maybe try to deal with some of the thorny issues that you face on a day-to-day basis and just don't have the capacity or bandwidth to address. But you're just living with that right now. That's what we see, not just producing merchant officers and having graduates go out, but to be part of this big California maritime community, and we're going to give and get back. That we're going to grow maritime, think of it in a different way. So, just to recap, we're already in that Pacific century. We're in it. We've got to tell people we're in the Pacific century. Look west. We're California. We're positioned on the Pacific Rim. Who is better positioned as a state to benefit from the Pacific century? And it's a maritime world. We want to grow our economy. Are we going to grow our economy selling to 330 million people? Or is it 2.6 billion people? That's the promise of the Pacific. The access to 2.6 billion people. There's growing middle classes all throughout the Pacific. That's how we grow ourselves. If we try to just sell to ourselves, that might not work too well. That we redefine maritime. I'm asking your help. Help us redefine maritime. Help us to figure out of those potential programs, which ones give the most bang for your investment in higher education at a maritime academy. Global partners still need our maritime leadership. They need U.S. leadership. When we look at things like the first response, those are global first responses. If it hadn't been for American maritime leaders in the midst of solving problems for those global disasters, what do you think would happen? do you think that that would have happened without us? And I think that most of you are saying no. The globe needs us, we need them, but they need our leadership. And I think we're green. I'm not touting we're green, I'm just showing you the facts. We're the greenest transportation mode, and we can get greener. We can start to use some of the things that are the energy sources out there, sustainable energy, and make it affordable. And maybe start connecting some dots between different segments of the maritime profession and community, that somehow the work in one of these segments levers someone else's prosperity and effectiveness. That's all I have. I'll take some questions. Just want you to know we are ready to be your educational partner, your research partner, and we're going for all maritime all the time. Thanks. We got time for about 10 minutes for questions. I do want to thank Norman. I forgot to say thanks, Norman. I mean, when I say all maritime all the time, look at those potato chips. Sea salt. Thank you, Norman. You got it. And if you don't have a question, that's okay. Yes, in back.
Hi, my name is Sue Devanch, and I'm a recruiter in the maritime industry. So I'm going to throw a tough one at you. The discussion happens all the time among myself and my colleagues about how to prepare people better and find more talent for the transportation industry. And we have, you know, right now we have jobs all over the country in all kinds of maritime disciplines. How do we solve that problem in the next 5 years? Love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think I'll try to give you a point of view that shared from the other state maritime academies, for sure, because I meet with their presidents. We need to increase enrollment in the programs we have at each of our universities. Almost all of those are state supported. And without state support to our programs, we are going to rely more on private and corporate support. And I realize that I'm talking to some of the corporate leaders here, but we are going to need some, when I say these partnerships, that we have a partnership to develop the workforce that's ready for 2020. There's some interesting, I mean, there's so much knowledge in the way it changes, and it's very rapid and dynamic. We know that. And a lot of what you learn in a college education today could be overcome by events quickly in even just a short 4-year academic career. So we have to stay up, but in order for us to do that, we have to have the faculty and a student body to put that together and support them. And right now, with the disinvestment in higher education, that makes it even more difficult. I see our only way out is with partnerships with the broader maritime community to meet those needs. And that's why I'm asking for you to help us focus on the programs that make the most sense to the profession. I hope that answered your question. Yes, ma'am.
Elizabeth Blanchard from Port of Stockton. I served on Congressman Dennis Cardoza's Academy Selection Committee, and presently I'm serving on Congressman McNerney's Selection Committee. And over the 5-6 years, I see young, handsome, beautiful women applying to be admitted to academies. And it seemed like they always put flyer boys first, aviation, Marines, but they don't go to merchant marine. They don't go into your academies. And I just wonder, are you revising or changing your marketing system so that more young people will look to that? Because we always have to say, well, if you don't get accepted in aviation, you don't get accepted in marine, would you consider Merchant Marine, they will always say, well, really, no. So it's sad to see that because I know you have a wonderful academy.
I think they're just turning down the high pay, so I don't know why they would do that. No, I think I take your point. I want you to know we are actively recruiting. In fact, Mark McGee here is actively recruiting women. We've been somewhere between 15 to 18% of our incoming classes are females. And many of them are in the marine transportation major, which is the deck officer. We also have some in engineering, but many are drawn more to the deck side in our school. But we are actively recruiting women, and I think I'll let you chat with Mark later on how he's strategizing to do that. But we're opening the opportunities to everyone. So I'm happy to have many more women at California Maritime Academy. Okay.
President Cropper?
Yes, I'm sorry.
It's me, Sabran.
Oh, Sabran.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the graduate program.
Well, I should ask you since you have the microphone.
Good try.
Well, as Norman mentioned, this year we're graduating the first cohort of 24 students in masters in the history of the school. This is our first master's program and first graduation. I think it's been very successful. We are recruiting now our third cohort. Our second one's in place. The value will ultimately be determined by people like you sitting in this room saying, am I getting something out of that? Sending my employee, sending one of my young up-and-coming persons into a master's program at Cal Maritime. I think it's cutting edge. I think that what I really like about that program, Sabran, is that if you're a mariner and you're going to sea, you can participate in that cohort. It's all fully online, and it gives young people who are in a very dynamic job market the opportunity to get that education and training. I would note I saw well, some would say alarming statistic, but to me it was it just maybe shattered some of my beliefs, but that the current graduates will have somewhere between 10 to 14 jobs by age 38. So we have a very highly mobile workforce, and I think we're answering the bells on that. Thanks. Here's one right here. Okay. I have about 2 minutes, and then we'll be back on track.
Very good. I just have a small question. I
Yes.
happen to be the proud father of two very straight A students. One's an honor student. What are you guys doing to reach down to the high school level? Because I spoke with one of your cadets today, and I work for the Port of Oakland in Maritime, and this is the first I've heard of your academy. So, I mean, so I know if I have my children having. So I'm saying, as far as, I hear you speak on the college level, but what are you guys doing as far as recruiting at the high school level to bring it to an earshot and an eye shot for those students that have no knowledge of you?
Okay, great question. I think that we recognize that. I'll put myself on report. I think I've met people in Vallejo who didn't know that we were a Cal State University school. I've met people in Solano County who don't know it. So we're coming out with a very active program I guess in coordination with Mark's recruiting efforts. We don't recruit in service area like the other Cal State schools. We serve all of California, so that makes it a little trickier given some of the resources. But we're going with probably more social media approach to getting to high schools and getting to guidance counselors. We brought Contra Costa educators across who are teaching in the STEM courses with some of their guidance counselors to introduce them to Cal Maritime this year. They'd never heard of Cal Maritime and weren't quite sure. They thought it was a military school. when in fact we're really a maritime university. So I appreciate the question. Sure. One more question.
Thank you. Brian Foss with the California Maritime Infrastructure Bank. But I'm also a board member of the Clean Oceans Project. Clean Oceans Project is dedicated to the lofty mission of cleaning up the trash pile in the North Pacific. And it is a huge problem that no federal agency, no world agency is really addressing. And I'm not asking CMA to do it, but it is something we have to be worried about, because it will eventually kill the oceans if we don't stop the bleeding of plastic being put in the ocean. It's 99% plastic. It degrades into molecular levels and threatens phytoplankton and can kill the oceans. It's just something we all have to be aware of.
Well, Brian, maybe 2 points on that. One, that we Cal Maritime are a member of the International Association of Maritime Universities. So this is global maritime academies and universities. I received a note from our Japanese counterparts in the fall expressing their deep concern about the debris wave coming from the tsunami. We know it's out there. It's already starting to hit in Washington State. So there is an international effort. We certainly don't have the people power to go out and do that, but we do have the intellectual heft in our faculty to kind of spur people on through their scholarship and writing. I think on the point on plastics, this is another piece I didn't bring up, but if we can find ways to use biodegradable materials in material handling on ships. Right now, I think what we do on many of our ships is we have some incinerators, we have some plastic, we melt plastic into pucks. If we can somehow find a way to move away from plastic and go to something biodegradable, I think there's some work over at Stanford on that right now. So it's just kind of pulling these different efforts together to meet those kind of challenges. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you listening, and I'm glad to have you as a partner.